Corey,
Here.
Nikki, Steve,
Here.
Russ?
Yep.
Yes. So, 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, Jack?
Yeah. Yeah, you're
And
stuck.
Myrna. That's 6. So we have. Now that a quorum has been established, I'd like to, the minutes went out to everybody. Hopefully you all read them. Okay. Is there any comment or can I have a motion?
Is Bill Byers' name spelled B-Y-E-R? I noticed that's how it was spelled in the minutes.
I think it's B-E-Y-E-R.
We changed that? or-
Yes.
E-E-Y-E-R.
Okay. Let's make note to the minute taker to correct it. So do I have a motion with that change to approve minutes?
So
Second?
Okay, I guess we're all here. All those in favor? Okay, so that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 0. Great, thank you very much. Okay, administrative matters. We remember at the last,
you had 2 minutes on the, just to both of them.
oh. Yes, that's right. Yeah. I'm so glad to be honest here. So the one we just approved, the one with Bill's name misspelled, was the one from the very last meeting, right?
Might have been the first.
The first meeting,
Not sure.
maybe it's both.
The November 10th definitely has it incorrect.
Okay. And the October,
Yeah, both, if it's spelled B-Y-E-R is incorrect.
October is incorrect.
yeah, okay, so let's take a motion for, I'm assuming the first one we did was for the last meeting. Let's take a motion for the October meeting
28th.
with the correction that we changed Bill's name.
So
Second? Favor? Okay, so let it, the record reflect that the minutes from October 28th and November 10th have been. Okay, next thing on the agenda is administrative matters. You may remember when we last met, it was prior to the election. And one of the things that we wanted to just make note of is whether people turned up for the election, because this was something that was obviously of interest to a lot of people. And as fortunate to have it, I think we had the best turnout for a
local town.
for a local town election that we've ever had by a large margin. So with almost 37%, I believe, of the townspeople showed up, registered voters. Yeah, we're not.
I tried to find data on the town website of the actual vote, how it broke out. I couldn't find it. I called the office today. Got that same message, but they didn't return it. The clerk's office.
Yeah.
My question is, I know it was a great turnout, and God bless the people with those 4 field hockey playoff games going on and the big football. You went on the actual day of.
Right.
But I wanted to know, how many people voted early? How many, did absentee ballot?
Yeah.
How many did mail-ins and the actual real people on election? day?
I think that's certainly an issue for the clerk. And, I believe there was some of that was in the buzz
That's online.
and it's online. Yeah.
Is it today?
Oh, it's all right.
I believe it's around half that show up in person, half that attend early. But I think the exact number was 18% early voters this time.
Which is what, lower than previous? I mean,
Pretty standard. No, I mean 18% and then the other 20.
So I think that the data is there apparently.
Okay.
And so.
I will check it out.
So I think we discussing that in the context of, the discussion about whether people vote when they have a real, if there's a topic of interest, if you have a personal interest in the outcome, does it mean that we get more voters coming in, more participation in government in general? And I believe that's one of the reasons why we wanted to make note of that at the last meeting. So there's no action there. It's just something we should keep in our mind that here we had an election where people felt a vested interest in the outcome one way or another. And so people showed up. So, you know, that,
They felt personally
Is that
Yeah.
37% of voters?
a registered voter.
registered voters.
Okay, so for me, sort of just making sure that I understand, this was in context of the override petition.
The
What
school.
percentage of voters, I mean, like when we were talking.
Yeah.
It was about the number I think in the document was 20%.
They usually
Yeah.
had 15.
Yeah, it's usually somewhere between 15 and 20,
15 to
depending
20.
on local or presidential.
Oh, President
No, I meant-
Haya.
I meant, what's the?
No, presidential has been higher than 20.
Do you remember the language?
So,
It was, hold on. Wait. Let me just have one conversation. Let's,
What I'm trying to ask is, this was particularly the language in the charter language that we had looked
Yeah.
at. You remember the percentage?
Yeah, it was regarding referendums.
Yes.
And we were talking about 20, the threshold for how many people have to show up for a referendum to be done. And 20%. We talked about, but you had talked about making it 20% of the voters, of registered voters, vote on the question. Just 20% show
Right.
up for an election and don't mark.
Wasn't the language 20% had to vote in favor of the?
no, just had to actually vote. So they didn't necessarily have to vote in favor of it.
There was something in the charter that in
The
order
older
to
language.
overturn something, 20%. Yeah.
Yes, the older language
Right.
has 20% of
Vote favorably for
vote
the
in
action.
favor to overturn. The newer language that we were
Yeah.
working with was
Sorry.
20% of the voters turned out for the
Yes.
question.
And they had to actually vote on the question.
So it's actually 50% or more would have to vote in favor, because the threshold is 20%.
Talking the proposed or the existing.
Um,
If 30% of the people showed up to vote, but only 18% voted to overturn it, it failed under the old language.
no, of the people who show up, we need more than half to vote in favor of the town meeting.
Yeah, the threshold before was 20% of registered voters. We want to change it to 20% registered voters who voted on the question.
So there's two issues. One is what constitutes a majority for, voters. So for example, if 20% of people show up to elect a town moderator, you look at, did more than half of them vote? Okay, look at that. So it's kind of similar. There's two issues. This is what is the threshold for showing up in order for this to be valid?
Right.
And you talked about it being 20%. Of the voters voting on the, must vote on the question.
Right.
So, that's a little stronger of a number than if you just said 20% of voters participate.
Right.
And of those 20%, whatever they are,
And I think we were figuring that if somebody comes to vote on a referendum question, that, and there's, although there could be other questions on the ballot, I think that was the issue, that you could have it as part of another ballot where that people are voting for town meeting and they're doing other things. We wanted to make sure that the people that those 20% actually voted on that question, whether one way or another. I think that was it. And I think the question we had was, is 20% too strong a number? The discussion, as I recall, was if people feel a personal interest or a vested interest in it, they show up. And we said, well, let's wait and see what happens at this election to see if that hypothesis holds true. And I would posit that that hypothesis does hold true based on our experience at this last election. Is that kind of a
Are we
consensus?
talking about just an election or are we talking about to overturn town meeting?
It's the language that's proposed in the charter for a referendum to overturn,
Not the existing charter.
correct,
Okay.
to overturn town meeting.
Right.
And that language, if I'm getting it correctly, correct me if I'm wrong, states at least 20% of the people who are
Registered voters.
registered to vote.
Right.
Actually vote on the question. That may,
I'm reading language
Okay, you got it.
2-14.
Yeah.
But an action of representative town meeting shall not be reversed unless 20% of the registered voters of the town
Mhm.
shall vote to reverse the vote of the representative town meeting.
that's the older language.
that's the language. And
We're going to propose to change it.
Okay.
So the change would read at,
The change would read, but no action of the town meeting shall be reversed unless at least 20% of the voters cast ballots on the ballot question.
So
But if an action shall, I mean,
wait a minute,
the first part is the question so submitted shall be determined by a majority vote of the registered voters of the town voting thereof. And we take out that we discussed and add, but no action shall be reversed unless at least 20% of the voters
the
cast
registered
ballots
voters.
on the ballot question, or
We said of registered no voters, not just voters, because if it's voters, it could be just the people who showed up for that one election.
well, we said cast ballots on the ballot. So, yes, that's,
No,
or
no.
20% of voters vote on the question. It was Winchester language that you liked, and we just said cast ballots.
I don't recall we came to some decision. I think part of the discussion, as I recall, was let's see on something that is important. Is who vote,
Yeah.
how many people show up?
Right.
And so if 36% of the people showed up and 2/3 of them voted in a particular way, that 2/3 is not quite 20%.
This is where but I just want to make sure that we're clear, and Russ, I know you tried to clarify, so I want to make sure that we have this right, because what you said is different than what I think we were saying. I think what we were saying is that, and you guys correct me, that 20% of the registered voters had to show up and vote one way or another on that referendum question. So it's 20% of the registered voters have to show up, not just voters, just registered voters. Because if you say of the voters, then it might infer the people who showed up to vote. And we're not talking about that. We're talking about 2/3 of the people who are registered in the town to vote have to actually come to the election, and that they have to cast a ballot on that vote one way or another. Right? And then whoever wins is the one who gets the majority.
Okay, so you're saying that if at least 20% of the people show up,
No, wait a minute. Wait a minute, let's just,
That's how I understood it. Although you did misspeak for a hot second there and said 2/3, but let's not worry about that.
I didn't mean.
20%
That's, yeah,
of the registered voters
Yeah.
had to show up and cast a vote on that question.
Yeah.
And then the winner is determined by the majority.
Right.
a simple
A
majority.
simple majority
Yes.
stat.
yes.
The idea being you're proving that enough of the populace spoke.
Yep.
And it did not require a higher than half in order to work. That was what I thought we were.
Yeah, me too. That's what
How I understood it was, let's say 100 people voted on that question. Let's say 100 people voted on this high school question. In order to turn it over, in order to reverse it, 20 of them would have to show up to vote to reverse.
No, 20% of the total registered voters.
Okay.
That's what the
Because that's not-
thresholds usually.
Because that's not how we had it written down as, I had it written down as 20% of registered voters who voted on the question. So
Yeah.
that would mean 20% of people who voted on the question.
Maybe it was lost in note taking.
Yeah, I think so. I think we need to fix that. Okay, so let's articulate that.
Hypothetically, if that was not the only thing on the ballot, and some people left it blank, how do you score it?
If somebody left it blank, then they don't count.
They didn't vote.
They don't,
They didn't vote on the question.
20%
So
of
it's
registered
people showed up to
voters.
vote, it's how many people cast a ballot
Correct.
On the ballot.
Yes,
for that question.
that's right.
How about this? I think we all, oh, sorry.
Is there a difference between a referendum on the ballot or in this case with the high school, it was a Prop 2.5 override, the wording, is that like,
It wasn't a Prop 2.5 override, it was
well, a Prop 2,
a version.
I think what we're talking about here is overturning a town meeting decision.
this is for town meetings?
This is
Yes.
overturning a town meeting decision. If the town meeting makes a decision,
Like the litmuses?
Hmm?
Like the litmuses for the assisted living, $500 a pop.
okay, so if somebody wants to overturn that for that decision,
Mhm.
that's what we're talking about.
Oh,
Okay.
Good.
So, and what we're saying, and let's see if I can get it right. So wordsmith me, please.
Focus on the intent. We'll let her wordsmith it after. And that way, if we
Okay.
all agree on the intent, we can.
20% of registered voters have to, show up. And they have to cast a ballot one way or another on that question. And then the simple majority will rule on the, which wins, which side wins. Okay, does anybody have any difficulty with
Yeah.
that concept? Are we good?
I do.
Okay,
If 20% of the people show up,
registered voters, right?
but 3% of that 20% will leave that question blank,
Right,
you now have only 17% of the people voting on that question.
correct. Which means it would not get overturned.
I also feel that if we're doing something, I'd say overturning a decision of town meeting is falling in the same category as a recall. And I would hope that we call for a supermajority, but if we're going to lower the number of people who need to show up, I would hope that we would call for supermajority on that, second majority.
What is a supermajority? Well,
57%.
I don't know, can you do that?
The town meeting, some things we're going to do, there's no.
So, there have been some discussions and I've seen at least one, town that requires the same majority that was required at town meeting. So if it had to be a 2/3 vote at town meeting, it had to be a 2/3 vote at the election. But that was only, there was only one that did that.
That was.
It's
Was it
not
our
very
High
comparator?
school
No.
required.
Was it one of our comparator companies? I mean, towns? Okay. So of the towns that we have selected as our comparator towns, none of them, they're all simple majorities.
Right.
I am also, so I do recognize that there's seemingly an incentive for people who are against overturning something to simply not show up and to make it so they have to reach the 20% with all yeses, which I don't even, I mean, we barely got that with, the majority was no here. But we barely got that with the overall turnout, 20% one way or the other. Am I making sense?
Yeah, but I don't
I
think,
think
I
you're
don't, I
misunderstanding.
think you don't understand. Yeah, right. I
Oh,
was gonna say,
jeez.
I don't think you're understanding. We're saying 20% of the registered voters have to come vote.
Yeah.
Not that they vote one way or another,
No, I know, but if someone wants to vote against overturning,
right?
they are better off not showing up so they don't reach the threshold.
There is a strategy, I guess you could say, for that. But
Generally, what happens is kind of the opposite. If somebody files a petition to overturn town meeting votes, the vote of town meeting becomes ineffective until you have, unless and until at the next election, you're actually ratifying the decision of town meeting. You're not voting to reverse town meeting. You're voting, it becomes, it's forced to go to an election and then you're ratifying.
The town meeting vote wasn't invalidated, to stay.
It was stayed. Until this happens. So,
that's a good clarification. We should probably make them that, because I did not understand that the case when we first discussed that. So, the clearer we are on that, I think the better.
That's why there are time limits within which they have to file a petition for the
Right,
overturn.
right. No, it makes perfect sense once you get it.
So the town meeting vote is stayed, assuming the petitions are filed.
Yeah,
Then it goes to an election.
right.
What is on the actual ballot? Is it the exact same question?
Town meeting be invalidated or overturned.
well, usually it shall the action of town meeting.
It's usually
Of course.
positive.
It's a positive. It's
Yeah.
not, should
Okay,
we ratify this or allow?
It'll
it
be
to
in some
remain?
sort of language a little bit. I think that the concept here, I just want to make sure we're all comfortable with the concept, the salient points being 20%, which is the same as what we had there, although 20% have to show up of registered voters.
When you're pointing at Jack's paper is the
Old,
current old language.
right,
Which is very different
yes,
from,
yes.
okay, but you just said what we have there.
No, because Jack was talking about the percentage, like we're lowering or upper, but we're still saying 20% of the registered
Except
voters.
that's where the language is different. In the old
Yeah.
language, it's 20% of the voters vote in favor of overturning.
Right.
That is not, none of that is true.
Yeah, in this
In
new
this
world.
new world.
None of that's post.
Right.
Thank you.
So let's just, I'll stop looking at Jack's paper and let's just talk about what it is we're trying to do. And I think we're actually there. Pat, if you can put the words around it and I think circulate that please to everybody.
Yeah.
And
We're
then,
gonna lower the threshold of the number of people who have to show up. I think we should increase the supermajority.
Can you explain how the proposal was the threshold of people who show up?
that's the part I was trying to.
No, the lower threshold, because 20% have to vote to overturn.
Rather than just.
Okay,
vote.
so I
If only 20% show up, 100% would
I
have.
understand what you're saying.
Instead of just showing.
We're gonna see, let's like,
So I think the central premise here was that there was concern that 20% was too high a bar.
yes.
Yes.
But this vote just proved that it's not too high a bar.
Yes.
Correct.
So
That's why we were
we
waiting
need to change anything.
I don't know that this previous vote, though, I think to what Corey might have been trying to get at, this previous vote, 24% voted yes. So that bar was barely overpassed.
Yeah, and this was an extraordinary
Yeah.
turnout for an election locally.
Was it 24% of registered voters in this past election
Well,
voted no?
well, it,
24% of the people who showed up to vote.
no,
No, they had.
no. They had like, it was like 60%, or not 60%. It was like seven,
68.2.
yeah, it was close to 70% voted yes,
Yeah.
and 30% showed up.
No.
Sorry, almost 40%.
voted no on the high school. Are we talking about the high school election?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, no, that was 32% yes, 68% no, thereabouts.
And,
It's
and
really one, yeah.
Yeah,
that whole group represented 37%
Yeah.
of six change of the Protestants. I understand exactly what you're saying, and I think you raise an excellent point. This is an example of an election that had high interest. If the result had been, maybe it almost was in some way, town meeting was just voting to move it to the
Right.
vote of the people.
Right.
So it's not quite the same. But let's say it's a little similar in that town meeting did a thing, the people responded, they were strong, and it was 20% at least of the registered voters who did in fact make a choice one way or the other. Right? So maybe you're right. Maybe it doesn't need to change because that threshold is meetable and it's hard. To your point, it's not easy to do, but people cared and they did show up.
Yeah, I think to overturn town meeting should not be a low bar.
I agree.
Myrna.
I forgot what I was gonna say. Town meeting voted to put this high school on with election, period. That's what they did, right? And I'm using this as a, okay,
They voted to approve the bonding of the money, which is a 2/3 vote.
and then to let the public vote on it. How many people voted at town meeting for that? 46 to 45? I mean, the point being that we don't get 126. We have maybe 100 people. And now you're throwing it out to the large registered voter population, which,
I want to make
in
sure,
my interpretation, all we had to do on November 15th was either approve or disapprove of the money. High school. All town meeting did was allow it to go to the public at large.
Correct.
I want to use the percentages to inform what we're trying to do. I do not want to get into a discussion of the
Fine.
content of what they did, because that's not relevant. What's relevant is 20% a reasonable bar? And we didn't know as a turnout, because we didn't know based on, what we've experienced in the past, which was like 12, 15%, it sounded like it was being overly ambitious. Again, the reason why we are talking about this is we had 37% of the people to show up, 20% no longer looks like it's overly ambitious, right?
To be absolutely fair, and I'm sorry, but I'm trying to be pedantically clear, it's not 20% turnout. It's, did 20% vote the same way? Did 20% of all the potential voters
Registered voters, right?
vote the same way, and that outcome was the result? That matters because in this case, yes, more than 20%, I think, what was it, 24, 27, 27? It'd be great if we had a whiteboard with the numbers there and we'd see it, but I don't have it. More than 20% showed up to say something. So in that sense, I think Steve's point is solid that, yeah, that is a case where it wasn't overturning a town meeting or anything like that, but it was a case where many people showed up and enough of a percentage of the total populace did vote in one way, or I want to say the affirmative, but they didn't vote. You get what I'm saying? They showed up and voted one direction.
On
So-
November 15th, the old standard was met.
Exactly. The old standard was, if this was that.
Yeah.
then-
So the question is, do we need to change the standard?
Yeah, and now I'm leaning
To your point, I'm just like a hole in the bucket here, Eliza, right? So
That's the point, is remember,
I'm now pointing again, because I think where we're coming back to is, really, do we need to change it?
I definitely, sorry. Okay. I definitely think the standard needs to be lowered because this election, which just barely met the threshold, was legendary turnout. To put it in perspective, 2024 local election, which was noted for several contested races that drew a much higher than regular amount of interest, I believe it had a total turnout of about 22%. People can check me on that, but this high school, there was extraordinary interest.
Yeah.
And definitely, I do think that the threshold needs to be, beyond just middling regular turnout, because, the scenario, the use case here is we are dealing with a colossal mistake the town meeting made, and probably a lot of the town meeting members would be like, oh my God, we messed up. Let's campaign to overturn this. But not one that's like, we can't just take the highest turnout election and say, oh, hey, it fit that. So a normal election, like, we don't need to change it.
And I guess well, go ahead. Marilyn, sorry.
Was this the first time that this Jack's paper was utilized?
It wasn't used.
It wasn't used.
No, it wasn't used.
To be clear, the vote that just happened is not
Relevant.
actually what we're talking about. But we're trying to use it as a game.
Yeah, but in the past is when we had this situation.
I don't recall it.
Okay, so. Okay, so, so the question remains. Last time we were here, we were thinking of saying 20% of the registered voters show up. And that that 20% has to actually vote on whatever the issue is that town meeting is going to get or not get overturned on.
If the question is, shall the voters overturn the town meeting vote? And the answer to that will be yes. 20% have to vote. 20% of the registered voters have to vote yes. That was something different.
That's not what the.
That's not what that's not what.
That's the just.
Yeah.
Right, what I'm talking about, what's being proposed.
So
So what's being proposed is, I guess you would call it a lower bar,
And I think that is a
to
lower.
Corey's point,
Yeah.
to Corey's point, that 20% of registered voters have to show up. That 20% have to vote one way or another on that question. And then we had said originally that it would be a simple majority to decide which way it was going to go. That's how we had put it together initially. And I guess what Winchester was similar to that, or somebody, we got that from someplace.
You got that from, yes, Winchester.
Winchester, okay. So the question is, do we want to do that, which to Corey's point makes it, maybe it's difficult, but it's not impossible.
And I was going to say, I think that does preserve the kind of don't show up if you don't want it to happen loophole. And I am wondering if the alternative of no threshold, but a supermajority required to overturn by the townspeople might be better. I don't know if that's done anywhere.
Just like the high school thing generated extraordinary interest, I would argue that to overturn an actual meeting should be something of extraordinary.
Oh, I would agree. with you.
Definitely.
So I don't think we want to lower the bar to the point that a small number of people could be frequently challenging town meeting and putting it down to the cost of an election and all that type of stuff.
Yeah, it's gotta be something that will, to your point, Jack, you know, that makes it so you don't get frivolous.
Definitely. And that's why the signatures is what it is, which I also had a problem with, because if it's never happened, the bar must be very, very high.
Our town meeting must be doing a really good job.
That too.
Okay, I don't wanna, we have a lot to do here.
Right.
And I don't, you know, we had kind of gone through this. I think we should put, I think we should have a proposal on the floor and vote on whether we want to go with the language that we had come up with, now that we know that 20% is no longer a unreasonable number. And see if we can get some consensus on that. If not, we're going to have to come back and get another proposal, but I'd like to see if we are in a position where we can move that along. So, everybody understands, I'm going to call it Pat's proposal because that is not your proposal, but the one you're documenting.
The question on the table, should we just have the vote during the town meeting, 20% of the voters have to show up and the simple majority have to vote to overturn?
To be clear, 20% have to show up and vote on the issue.
And vote on
Because
it.
if there was two things to vote on,
You said they don't have to vote on the issue.
Okay, and vote on the issue. Okay, that is
And
what
a
is,
simple majority of that 20% voting.
yes. Okay, so, all those who would propose that, again, remember, we're just proposing this, we will come back at it. So this is not like forever and ever. Go ahead.
Alternatively, you can just make a motion to keep it the same.
Well, that would be the other motion. Which one do you want to make?
I'm not making a motion. As an alternative, you can make a motion to just keep the language as it exists today.
if you're trying to just move things along, I don't know that I'm super comfortable and I'd like to make table. Because it sounds like there was enough concern.
Yeah,
Maybe we want.
I think,
I don't feel like you can make a decision right now.
I feel like maybe there's other alternatives.
well, I just want to,
So Jess, you want to suggest you a substitute motion?
let me finish this first, okay?
Sure.
We have a motion that I'd like to make, and you can vote against it, but I'd like to do it because I want you to remember how we got here. We can't, we got here because there was concern that 20%, the way it's written today, is too high. And what we're trying to do is get that and get it reasonable. So there's a balance between what's too high and what's appropriate. We went to, what do other towns do? We have Winchester, who has what they have in there, which is basically the proposal that we're making. And so we could move in that direction, and we are tightening it up a bit, but not making it so, it's not so easy, it's gonna be frivolous, but not so onerous that it, would never happen. So, I already know the answer to this before we vote, but go ahead. So if we call that 20% of the registered voters, 20% have to vote. And then of those who vote on the question, it has to be a simple majority would be one proposal. Okay. And
So 10.1% of registered voters could overturn the decision of town meeting.
yeah,
The absolute
I
minimum, yeah.
want to know that.
okay. I think, okay, so how about a proposal to leave it the way it is?
I'm in favor of that.
I would support that as opposed to that there may be some middle ground.
Okay, then who wants to form a committee, come up with a recommendation to make to us at the next meeting? Because that's how we're gonna get through this.
So you want to table this?
I want specific people to volunteer to work the issue and come back to the next meeting with a recommendation. Because we can't not have a recommendation on this.
Oh. Yes, we can, we can just choose not to change it, leave it the way it is.
Well, that is the recommendation then, but we don't have support for that. So we don't have support for what we have, right?
Let's see, let's make a motion. Make a motion to keep the current existing language as is, which seeks 20% of the registered voters to, what's the language? Reverse town meeting's vote?
It says.
Shall
shall
vote to reverse the vote of the representative town meeting.
And not to confuse things, but I have noticed that this language which we used from it seems to be a little unclear to you with respect to what is the question on the ballot. And so I want to know what your answer is, but I'm going to work on the language a little bit to update it, just so you know, under the state law, like, which I'm, the language would be, what's placed on the ballot is, shall the town vote to approve the action of the representative town meeting whereby it was voted, brief description of the substance. So it's a vote in the affirmative. So you want
20% of registered voters will have to vote yes.
20% would have to vote no under this because
I would have to vote no.
it's like the way this is worded, it's right. So, because what you're asking,
20% to approve what they did,
right,
to ratify what they already did.
So it's not about ratifying, it's about undoing it.
but
Right.
it's,
That's backwards.
it's backwards to what the state law is, what you have in your language. So under this and this language, it's very odd language, but it says shall not be reversed unless 20% shall vote to reverse. So what we need to do to make it different from the state law is put in the question. It would not be like it says under state law, it would be shall the town vote to reverse the action of representative. It would be an assumption that it would continue unless reversed. But that's what this language is doing. Because it's never been put up to a vote, I don't know what language they use on it. Under the state law, you would be stating positive. Do we vote to, approve this? But under your language, you need 20% to reverse it. So it's almost like so if that's the understanding you have and you leave it like that, I think I would want to make clear in this language what the form of the question is.
Maybe the best way around it then, Pat, is to have you draft the language of what we're saying here.
I don't like the idea that people have to vote to approve what town meeting already did.
I agree. I think it should be about reversing it.
If you're going to
So that's the current
overturn
language.
what town meeting did, so validate what town meeting did, which then leaves it as if nothing happened. It just invalidates the vote, and it's as if town meeting didn't vote. So whatever the question was, it's gone, wasn't addressed.
If such petition, it's invalid, if not enough people show up, the town meeting.
No, I'm trying to get to
Yes,
the action town meeting, are you going to invalidate what town meeting did, or reverse what town meeting did, or support what town meeting did? There's three options.
under the state law, the way it is written, and which this kind of falls back to because it doesn't specifically say the form of the question. Under the state law, the form of the question is, shall the town vote to approve the action of town meeting? Yes or no? Once you get to the ballot, it's a yes or no. Do you approve this or do you not approve this? And but your threshold says at least 20% have to vote no. So what you're saying is, I'm so sorry.
The question the voters should be asked, if you like what town meeting did, you don't have to do anything. If you don't like what town meeting did, do you want to, if town meeting voted yes, do you want to change their vote to no? Or you don't like town meeting, invalidate as opposed to reverse. The town meeting, if town meeting voted yes to raise $100 million, do you want to invalidate it as if the vote didn't take place? Or do you want to vote so the outcome will be the opposite of what town meeting did? So there's invalidate or reverse, two different things.
But there's a yes or no vote that we're talking about. So how do you can't reverse it. It's not like, what's the opposite of,
If state law says we have to state it in one way, don't we have to state it in that way?
there's some wiggle room and you could approve it, but the fact of the matter, once it gets to the voters and you've met your threshold number, what this is saying, what your current language is saying is that 20% of registered voters must vote no.
The people who circulate the petition to get the question on the ballot are going to have to state the question, reverse or invalidate. It's a burden is on them to do it because they're the one who's moving the action.
Well, that's not what the current state law,
State
Right.
law is whatever the legislature
Hearing.
approves in our language.
Okay,
so
so
hear you on that.
I think that what we have here is, Jack, you're interpreting one way, Pat, you're telling us it's a different way. So at the moment, I think we have to, I think state law tells us we have to do something.
It can go contrary to state law as long as the legislature approves it.
Okay,
Do you agree?
It can, but the legislature is looking for language that is similar to it. So I can't say, yes, they're going to approve this, or they may want it to look like what.
Legislature previously approved this.
And if part of our mission is to make a charter that provides clarity for people who read it. Sure sounds like contrapositives and extra negatives aren't helpful. So if we can move things in a way that the intent, we all think is,
Right.
town meeting, cast something. Now I understand the nuance of invalidate versus overturn. I think
let's not do that.
Let's not do that.
We can't solve that here.
we can't solve that, but that is a thing to be solved. And then certainly the vote in the affirmative for the voter should be, we want to change what has happened. So they're voting to change something, which is how overrides and referendums usually thought about.
So if they want to change it, they have to vote yes.
That is what I would propose makes the most sense to your average voter. Because the layman's question would be, town meeting did this. Do you want to overturn it? Yes.
Okay, so then the language would have to change to 20% would have to vote yes.
Dodging all of that at the moment. I'm just acknowledging
Vote
the
to
affirmativeness.
So
of it.
whatever.
Vote to reverse,
Which
I think which we could be, and then we're not dealing with the
which
language
allows the
of
flexibility.
writing up, that we shouldn't be dealing with the language of how the ballot's written. That's beyond what we need to be doing, and I totally agree with you. I think, so Pat, I'm gonna ask you if you could just write that up and circulate it, and then we come back at the next meeting, and first thing, let's just, if you have an issue with it, let's, come prepared to discuss some alternative language. I just want to move, come prepared with alternative language if it's not what you think.
Then I
should be.
propose we get Robert's Rules v. Formals on it. You bring the language before the meeting. Everyone read the language. If you want to make an alteration to the language, you propose it as an amendment to the language and we vote on it. We can have a discussion and do the whole business.
How we do that, I don't want to get into how we're going to run the meetings on that, but I think,
Am I writing up the language as is, or?
no, you're writing up what we have just been talking about.
And the language should be,
What Russ just
as
said.
Russ put it forward, it should follow the spirit of what Russ said. We ask the voters to overturn an action of town meeting.
But based on the existing threshold,
Yeah, right.
which I think was her question.
Oh, well, we can change numbers then, but the
I dodged
approach.
I dodged the question of
The number.
numerics on purpose. So let's put it this way. I propose that the language you write up is the language that says, number one, we put it in the affirmative so that when a voter votes, they're voting to reverse. There, I picked one. Voting to reverse the
How many votes?
town meeting vote. I propose that the language include, as a starting point that we can argue about later, 20% of all registered voters must have acted on the question.
Yeah.
And a majority of that result is the outcome. Does that make sense?
Okay, okay.
That must have showed up to vote and acted on that question.
I just want to make sure she understands those parameters, and then if you write that and present it to everyone ahead of time, everyone can say, I want this number to be 30, or I want this word to say.
I agree, I agree. Okay, so let's move on. We have a decision. Pat's going to do that. We'll get it sent out, Pat. You can get it to me, I'll get it. And we'll get, you send it to me, I'll get it out to everybody immediately. Everybody, please come prepared with, if you don't like the language, come with the counter proposal. If you don't understand the language, let's ask the question. And then we can get this done and decide on it. Myrna.
When was this approved? And number two, how many registered voters are there in town? Tuesday.
Well, when was what, what Jack's talking about?
Yeah, what,
Oh, that's
So from 70,
1970 something.
1970.
50 or
Okay.
50 plus years.
So, but that doesn't really,
I'm just asking.
okay,
There's 19,493 registered voters.
I'm sorry.
19,000.
493 registered voters.
19,409. Oh, I remember that, yeah. Okay.
Thank you. Okay, so let's move right along. I'm hoping that this is,
The registered voters, we get 25,000 people in town. and-
well, there are a number of people who aren't registered. That's a different topic, another day. Let's move on. So we're still in administrative matters. I'm gonna make this very quick. I think I mentioned at our last meeting that we were starting to look at a resident survey and, ask people if they would like to participate in that process, to let me know. We had our first interview today, and I need to share. And there will be more about this in more detail for sure. But one of the things that came clear to me,
scroll down.
one of the things that came clear to me as we're going through this, and I want to point out to you because I want to make sure we're on top of these things, and I'm concerned that we're not. It's a very sensitive
Yeah.
user.
Is this touchscreen? You want me to touch it? Is it touchscreen?
Yeah. Thank you. Okay. Thank you. And there we go. Remember the time frame that we had when we talked about this in September?
Maybe use your button.
Okay. Yeah, my button won't work. It's only this one. Anyhow, so in September, we talked about the timeline, and this was, the Collins Center gave us the initial thing. We played around with it. But it occurred to me that we're actually off track on some things. Now on the communications group, with the website and all that stuff, that's up and going and great. But on the stakeholder interviews, they're all done, but we don't have the analysis quite done yet. So that part is taking longer, but we're interviewing more people than I think we were going to do. The thing that we need to do is we need to go to town meeting for money for the survey. That's January 26th. So
What's the deadline to put the article?
I can put in an article. It's like December 8th or something like that. But we can put a placeholder in. We're not going to know the amount of money and that sort of thing. And but I'm hoping we'll definitely have the two vendors interviewed before December 8th. So we'll have a general idea. So I'm being optimistic and say, okay, let's assume that town meeting approves the budget that we are going to be asking for the survey. And then it looks to me like we're probably talking about creating the survey in March, April, running it May, end of April, May, June would be getting the results. And then the rest, I think, kind of stays on track. Part of the issue why it'll take longer to do is because we're taking longer to go through things than we thought we were going to, or Collins thought we were going to do it. So we are starting the executive tonight, which means we got to get through this stuff real fast that I'm doing so Pat can get to her part. But I want to make sure that we're all understanding that these things are having an impact on timeline. And we also are looking to do public input forum, which is something that we had talked about, you know, where we're going to get input, and we have some ideas. Patrick's done a lot of them, so I think he's going to be really helpful in thinking through the format for that. But doing one in January, and then as the first one, and more later about how that's going to work, because we're going to need members of this committee to help on that. And then probably do another one later in the April-May timeframe. And then, of course, all these meetings are open, so people are welcome to come and all that sort of thing. I've certainly been getting some emails from people who are watching it on VCAP, which is fabulous. But I just want us to keep this in mind. I just did the slide this afternoon. I am not a PowerPoint person, as you can tell from the slide, but we're still okay in terms of hitting our deadline. We may have to double up and do some extra meetings, but I think we're still okay, but we can't allow too much more to slip. So we're going to have to figure out a way that we can manage this process, but at the same time, we're not going to cheat the process. So if it means extra meetings to get through the stuff that we need to get through, and if there are tough discussions to be had, we'll have them. I mean, certainly this group we got a lot of forceful personalities, which is awesome because nobody cowers for anybody else, you know, and everybody speaks their mind, and that's exactly how we want it to be. But I just want to make sure that we have the fact that we actually are on a timeline and we have a project plan, and we want to make sure we're sensitive to that. So that's all I have. Okay, I'm going to hand this over to you. So now we're about to jump into, I guess the only other thing is and I'm not going to do the subcommittee updates right now unless there's something screaming from any of the subcommittees, because I think we need to jump into this part of discussion.
I don't think we have a slideshow function on this, so you'll just get the squares down the left as well.
The one other thing I was going to say is I sent an email out to everybody today with a copy of the select board's handbook from the state of Massachusetts. And I just got it late in the afternoon, so you got it as soon as I got it. Well, I sent it at like 5:30 or whatever it was. It was late. And so it's okay you didn't look at it, but it's something I want you to refer to. And chapter 4 goes into administrative responsibilities and that sort of thing. So, and I think this is, would be helpful. And if we need to come back at something because we read there and weren't prepared to have the discussion today, that's so be it. But I'm sure we have.
So tonight, I am not going to be putting you through reading charter language samples, but we're going to talk a little bit about the executive branch of the town. And I would really love for this if you've heard that there have been issues with any of the subjects that we talked about, if you have any ideas for changes, please speak up as we go along. I'm happy to, it would be great to start having some of these discussions along the way.
Just a comment there. The people who are doing the stakeholder interviews, if you heard anything about anything that Pat's talking about, don't tell us who or what, but if there was an issue that was teed up in the course of your discussions, please share that with the group.
The first thing I want to start by saying is that we are talking about the system of government and not about any individual people in these roles.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to be using words, whether we talk about town administrator or select board members, we're not talking about any particular people. What we're talking about is, in general, what are the responsibilities and authorities of the structure of these positions? So Our goal, one of the things that we're trying to put together is to find the answers to include some of the components that are included in charter language regarding the select board and the executive branch. That includes the composition of the select board, their terms of office, their powers and their duties. What is their appointing authority? We're going to talk about who do they appoint or not appoint. What is their role in developing policies? Select board members are licensing agents, so we're going to talk a little bit about their license authority. We're going to talk about the role of the town administrator and the role of other elected boards in the select board process. And much of this will be unique to Burlington. So I'm hoping to have some discussions along the way. If you've heard, is this working for you? Is this not working for you? Is there something that we want to change? But I kind of want to start it with what the language says in the special acts, what the language says in the bylaws, and what the actual practices to help you kind of understand the current lay of the land. So in Burlington, the select board is the chief executive body. Doesn't mean that there aren't other multiple member bodies that are handling portions of the responsibilities of the town. But they're responsible for administering local government. Burlington has 5 select board members with 3-year staggered terms. And the select board meets about twice a month. This is fairly typical for, towns of this size. Generally, there are 3 or 5 select board members. Burlington size would more likely be 5. So some of the some of the authorities of the select board that are generally all select boards work on is they prepare the warrant for town meeting. They're charged with calling elections when an election is required, and they appoint certain boards and committees. Their formal responsibilities are set out through hundreds of mass general laws, special acts, and the town bylaws. The link that I had sent to Betsy is a link to the select board's handbook, and that does detail some of the responsibilities that select board members have when they come into office. In Burlington, the select board also serves as the Board of Public Works. The select board also sets policy. They provide strategic planning in areas that are within their authority. And they have a role in approving contracts subject to appropriation for the departments within their control. The select board acts as a licensing board for the town, and the select board appoints the town administrator and a couple other key staff members.
I have a question about that. Select board, on the strategic planning. I thought it was beyond the areas of which they are authority. I thought it was really for the town, that they were the strategic planning body. Is that not, because we may have other strategic plans for each function, but
They are the overarching one, but they also provide for their specific departments. So there's kind of a dual role there.
okay, so those are 2 different things. So I would think that as we discuss this, that is, the kind of overall strategic planning for the town itself.
The keywords are within their authority.
No,
That's a limiter.
right, that's limiting, that's beyond, because their authority does not apply to a whole lot of other area, like
And
boards,
we
committees,
can
et cetera.
talk about that. And those are some of the issues that we'll talk about as we go along.
Okay.
To what extent should they have authority for all of the strategic planning? In general, they have a lot of requirements under Mass General Law that they must follow and must be in charge of. And when it comes to many things, the buck stops with the select board. They're expected to be the point for much of this planning process. There may be some elements that are carved out individual boards. So I wanted to talk a little bit first, since one of the select board duties is appointments and committee appointments in particular. So the special act is silent and the bylaws are a little bit unclear with respect to the division between the select board appointments and the town administrator committee appointments. And these are not standing committees that are appointed by the town moderator. We're kind of done talking about those for right now. These are appointed boards like Conservation Commission, et cetera, not elected. So under general law, unless something is referred to the town administrator or to the manager of these appointment authorities, it's the select board's duty to appoint any of these required appointed boards. Oddly, under your bylaws, the headings say the town administrator's appointments are Conservation Commission, Historical Commission, Town Beautification Committee, Information Systems, and the Berlin Housing Partnership Committee. But if you read the language under the heading, it says the select board appoints these. So it's a little unclear. The special act is silent, which would lead it to appear that the select board is likely the appointing authority. But so I thought, let's talk about what happens. In practice, the town administrator is involved in posting and soliciting members to apply for these boards and committees. And the town administrator refers all the candidates to the select board to choose and appoint these board and committee members. So when we're talking about appointed committees, and in a minute, we'll be talking about elected. You have a lot of elected boards in Burlington compared to many towns. So we're taking those out of the equation. But the ones that you have that are still appointed, in practice, the town administrator helps with the process of recruiting and gathering candidates for these positions.
I'm going to question the town administrator comes to the board and says, I'm offering to appoint Joe Schmo. But unless the select board says no, that's it. The only thing the select board does is either say no or waive the 15-day time period for the appointment to be done.
So my understanding is that is true of department heads and certain other appointments, but for the boards and committees, when I spoke to the town administrator,
It's not up there. How is that done?
my understanding is that for all of the boards, regardless of how they say, all of the candidates are presented to the select board to choose. And that's, I talked to the town administrator about that. I didn't talk about every single board, but that's generally what happens. And we can talk a little bit, should that be what happens? In many towns, especially when those, and we talked about, there's kind of a sliding scale. We'll get to this discussion, but a sliding scale of what a town administrator versus maybe a stronger town manager does. In many, it is like you said, the town administrator or the town manager said, I'm appointing this person, and that appointment can be, rejected. There's a few different ways of doing it. The town administrator could have absolute authority to appoint. There could be a process by which the select board has to approve the appointment, or there can be a process by which that candidate moves forward unlikely. So those are some things we're going to be talking about. But right now, what happens is the select board makes these appointments. The names are offered up. If there's 2 or 3, the select board takes the one. And they're put forward. But we can talk a little bit more about if that's working. But at this point, I just want to talk about what's happening on the ground. So those are like what we want to talk about a little bit next is a minute ago we talked when you look at your org chart, there are the executive board, the executive branch doesn't just include the select board, right? The select board under the bylaws has general control over these following departments: DPW, engineering, police, fire, building. And this is kind of an odd smattering under the bylaw that doesn't necessarily meet up with what is on your org chart. But these are the things mentioned in the bylaws that the select board exercises general control.
Where's the list of appointed, appointed committees? Do you have that as well?
The list of appointed committees in general, if you look at your,
By the select board?
by the select board,
Yeah.
it's interesting because it doesn't flow naturally, but when you're looking at those, they're actually listed under the town administrator. When you're looking at those, the committees that are under there, for example, Conservation Commission, Council on Aging, the Historical Commission, those are listed in this row. And that includes the appointed committees. I don't know if we have a full list is included in this org chart, but in general, those are the appointed committees.
I'm looking, you were talking about CBA, I was looking for that. Yeah,
So that's usually the Board of, here you call it Board of Appeals.
the Board of Appeals up there, okay.
It's the zoning Board of Appeals, but it's the Board of Appeals. And those are all under, they're under the bylaws. Individually, so they may have some discussion of many
Yeah.
who's appointed in the bylaws.
Okay.
So what I'm trying to point out to you is that the special act, the bylaws, and how it's happening may not all match up, but we're going to work through it a little bit together and talk a little bit about what's working and what's not. So these are the general departments, and we'll talk about why. Right here, chapter 549, which I'll call the Town Administrator Act, for the town of Burlington, it delineates how staff are appointed. Said administration, and in this context that refers to the town administrator, shall appoint and remove, subject to chapter 31 of the general laws, which are the civil service laws, all department heads, all officers, and employees who come under the jurisdiction of the Board of Selectmen, now the select board, except the town accountant and town council. Names shall be transmitted in writing to the Board of Selectmen at a meeting duly called and shall become effective on the 15th day following the day on which notice is filed, unless said board shall within said period vote by a majority to reject any such appointment. So essentially, with the exception of the town accountant and town council, and we'll talk in a minute, they kind of interpret that to include a couple other positions as well. The names are, the town administrator gives the names of department heads under the jurisdiction, under the select board's jurisdiction, to the select board, and the select board has an opportunity within 15 days to, by a majority, vote to reject any such appointment.
Should put language in there about the 15 days unless waived, because very often, right there at the meeting, a motion is made to waive the 15 days. So the appointment takes effect immediately. That's frequently done.
I was going to suggest any language in the charter, like you said, that some of the issues that come up, waiting 15 days can be difficult when you're hiring for a position and somebody may, doesn't want to give notice if they don't know yes or no for 15 days. That's a very long time. So like you said, either there should be language, there could be language in there moving to waive 15 days, or you can say that the board can vote to accept or reject. So for example, you can give the board an opportunity to accept this person right away instead of waiting 15 days, or like you said, in for 15 days. But it should be in the language in the charter.
Whatever's clearer. I think whatever's clearer to the person reading it,
Right.
who's not a lawyer and doesn't read this stuff all the time.
Right now, it's not very clear.
And I think the opportunity to approve it faster, especially given the
Right.
fluctuation of job market,
Yeah, I agree.
would be wise.
And
I couldn't hear what you said then.
I think giving the ability for them to approve it tomorrow if they wanted, especially given how job market fluctuates over time, I think would be wise. Basically giving that option to move on a candidate faster.
Another alternative is shortening the 15-day notice. However, given the calendar of the board meeting twice a month, I think 15 days is probably allows it to go to the next meeting, doesn't require them to have a special meeting in order to have that kind of vote.
I think as long as we've got the fact that they can do an immediate hire, then
Mhm.
that's fine. That's fine.
So that language could be tightened up to allow
Well,
that.
I think more often than not, they wait 15 days.
Because there's no,
Confirmation.
Well,
There's-
hopefully they're not doing it anymore because they're gonna lose a lot of candidates if they do.
so, the bylaws and the special act set out, the select board staff appointments. The select board appoints the town administrator. The select board, who is the Board of Public Works, appoints the superintendent of public works. They appoint town council and the town accountant. There's also language about the select board appointing the fire chief, police chief, and animal control officer. Whether that's because they're part of the civil service system and the select board's the appointing authority, or, whether how involved the town administrator is in that process, I'm really not entirely clear on. But,
Didn't we opt out of selective service?
I believe you did for one service, but not the other, but I'm not sure. But in any event, this language, right,
You could add the treasurer to that list then.
right. Because this is old language, which is why I wanted to,
What about the communications director?
Officer, communications officer.
Officer?
Yeah,
That-
as well.
that would be under, not an exception that the select, that would probably be a town administrator, a position where they, and we'll talk a little bit about this. But I think the reason the fire chief, police chief, and animal control officer are in there were because originally they were civil service positions, so that the select board was the appointing authority. I think that the town council and town accountant are in there because of that exception we saw earlier. Oftentimes, the town council and the town accountant are kind of seen as a check and balance
Mm.
on the administration. So it's, usually the town administrator would be very involved in that process anyway, putting out notices, et cetera. But that's why those two are in there specifically as select board appointments pulled out.
All of those except town council employees, we town council is a contract service.
Yeah, and that's true. Town council can mean anything, but in this, it's set up under the laws, the town council could be a private.
Some places,
director or-
city council,
or
or
a
a
city
full-time
council.
employee, but
Right.
not here.
Right, but it's, I think when you refer to it here, it's kind of more in the generic sense, like it's a job title, not a person. So whether who they work for is irrelevant. It's just there is a town council and that function reports to
The select board.
the select board.
And I love all this input because this is what we need to do to craft the charter language and understand how things may have changed over time. And you may have received some input into this. So I'd love
So
to.
I mean, we were going to invite John into one of our meetings and probably the next one would make some sense, but you tell me. So as a practical matter today, who I know that the select board blesses the police chief and the fire chief and that sort of stuff. But
Even lieutenants and
who hires, I mean, who's really doing that? I mean, is it the select board or is it really the town administrator, what's happening today?
I think that, that's a good question for the town administrator. Oftentimes for certain positions like fire chief and police chief, I don't know what your community does, but there's often an appointed a mix of residents and other.
They have like a search committee.
Right, have a search committee.
Yeah.
So that's probably part of it. The search committee is probably pulled together by the town administrator. Town administrator does all the work and it may be a distinction without a difference.
Mhm.
Except, we can talk to John a little bit about that. Um, But it's just a question of whether the select board is making the decision before or after the town administrator narrows it down to.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons to kind of limit this number is because it can be very intimidating for somebody who's applying to a position they may not have told their employer yet, to, have to go before the select board when they're one of 4 or 5 candidates and may not even get the position, and it's public that they've looked at that job, where it's a little bit easier on the candidates to have all of those meetings be not during and then be winnowed down to a candidate with the select board to which objective or accept. Okay, so this is not appointment, this is department administration. So as far as who is reported to, according to the special act and on the org chart, they kind of pull these out as the town council, the town accountant, town administrator, and the treasurer collector report directly to the select. And that may or may not be what's happening on the ground, but that reflects both the special act and having hauled out kind of the financial piece and the town council piece. And we talk more about whether anyone thinks it's working, or have you heard anything about whether that's working or not. And really, are the select board, how closely are they able to, supervise? The select board is always going to be the primary responsible for the town administrator. But are they also able to closely kind of supervise and follow these other positions? We can talk a little bit about more. There's, typically, if the select board is going to retain authority over a position, it's often the town council led a financial piece because of this whole check and balances issue, but it doesn't necessarily have to be.
Are there any issues on the checks and balances with like treasurer collector actually reporting into the town administrator?
Well, under org chart, they report to the treasurer collector reports to the select board.
Right.
But that's also an added position because that used to be an elected position. So it's not referred to in the special act. It wasn't amended to include that, but
No, I'm not talking about Burlington. I'm
Right.
talking in general.
General.
Yeah, is there, like, it makes sense to me that you have on the financial part, you have like the separation, between the town administrator and you have some of the financial functions reporting directly to the select board. So you don't have, one person, town administrator, have control of all the financial decisions that you have a check and balance there. So that's what I was wondering, is the treasurer position in other towns, is that generally going to fall under the select board or under a town administrator, manager, whatever we end up calling
yeah, I think it depends. Oftentimes, the treasurer may be under the control of the town manager, town administrator, but there may be, the select board has the right to choose the auditor. So in many towns, the auditor would then be the function that the select board is controlling is selecting the check and balance. But just on a day-to-day basis, there needs to be a lot of interaction between the
Right,
and the treasurer.
Right. I get that.
So I would say it's a balance in those where the treasurer collector isn't reporting to the select board. Sometimes the select board instead has the choice of the auditor.
Can we get you guys to put together for the towns, our comparator towns,
Sure.
how they structure that and how they get the division of, try to watch out for the. Okay, thanks. Be good to look at what other towns are doing.
So, looking at, so just to give you an idea, because we're going to talk a little bit about, there are departments that are not necessarily under the control of the select board and the town administrator, but according to the org chart and this special act, the town administrator is responsible for, administering and coordinating, departments and boards under the select board's jurisdiction, other than the ones we just mentioned, other than the, legal and accounting. Some of these include, the assistant town administrator, building inspector, youth and family services. I'm calling it the Conservation Commission and administrator, so the staff member. The Council on Aging and all of their employees,
Right.
that whole department. Economic development, emergency management, fire, historical commission, HR, information systems. You can probably just read it down on the list. Do you pronounce it ISAC?
Yeah, I said.
Police, public works, the register of voters, and veteran services.
Actually, I
HR
said,
has changed. There's two HRs now. There's one
well, this, yeah, there's
on
one
the
for the
town
school.
side, and one from the school side.
Right. And,
And ISAC reports to the select board. They were appointed by and report to.
What is ISAC?
It's the cybersecurity committee that was put together, and that's another division of, we want to have that separate from the IT department, just like finance, so we need to get that fixed.
we can definitely, it sounds like a great question to talk to John about next time. So, I'm sorry, you had a question too?
I was just saying HR is split now. It's an HR that they now have two HR that one person was splitting the time between school and town. They now have, she's gone full time to the school, so new one, right?
Okay. Great. Many cities and towns have two, school boards completely separate.
Yeah.
But they often, the town HR person is the person who is in charge of the benefits for both sides.
That's
Because they're
true.
all under the same. benefit
Those are
plan.
actually under finance.
Okay.
Under the treasurer.
All right. So I want to talk a little bit about, under the act, the town administrator's duties. And here, it sounds pretty general, but I'm going to point out a couple that we can have some more conversation on. They made it very easy. So I gave you the special act, but they also just incorporated all of these into the bylaws as well. So they'll be familiar in both. In general, implementing the select board policies and votes is the town administrator's duties. Administering the personnel systems, including the personnel policies and collective bargaining negotiations. So it's in a town where you have the various boards, people working for the various boards, it can be a little difficult to, isolate what personnel, make sure that everybody's getting the personnel and HR, getting the needs met on all the boards. But the town administrator is clearly the person in charge of the whole personnel system, which will include the personnel policies that will apply across the board to all of the staff.
So I think what you're referring to is the divided authority for someone who is employed by the Board of Health, which is an independent elected board.
Right.
Where is the divided authority there? That example.
I think that it may not be so clear under your current bylaws. And we may have some suggestions for just making it more clear in the language that we would put into a town administrator or town manager duties to make it clear.
Those people fall into the collective bargaining group.
If they're union.
Yeah.
If they're not, then where do they go?
Well, we have both union and non-union.
Right, but if you're, I think the union's the easy part.
Yeah.
Because it's clear that the union negotiation happens by the town administrator. Right? Where I think it gets murky, yeah, to your point, is for the non-union people.
But they are organized as a group.
Well, I don't believe they actually, they are, but they're not. It depends on which board they work for. It depends on, and you've got, from a policy perspective, let's take HR for example, from an HR policy perspective. Who sets the rules, work hours? Who sets the, if you have so many absences, who sets the rules for dealing with performance issues? Who sets those kinds of things? That's really murky. And I've heard that loud and clear in some of the interviews I'm doing, is that who do I report to? Do I report to the town or do I report to the board? And an example was given that during COVID, that there were some departments were told that they didn't need to come in at all or have anybody there, and other departments that were required to have people there. And then, so you had one set of rules for somebody, and across the hall, you had people operating with a different set of rules, rather than, or is everybody from an HR policy perspective fall under the town of Burlington human resource policies administered by, in this case, the town administrator, because the town administrator has no authority, and the board does not, the board does not have the authority to kind of overrule what the town-wide personnel policies are. That's where I think there's a bit of a rub, and not that we're going to solve it, but there is clarity issues that we need to try to get at when it comes to when people report, are not union and report to board or a committee.
But if the town administrator is not the hiring person, should they be the supervisory person?
Well, it depends on how you define supervisor, and you've got who gives work direction and sets priorities in terms of work direction. And then you've got kind of then the feedback on that. And then you've got somebody who's establishing the policies for various and some things. So my guess is it's somewhat going to have to be somewhat matrixed for those of you who are used to matrix kind of organizations. But it's a discussion we're all going to have, and we need to figure that one out because it is causing a lot of pain.
I have a question. So CBA, is that bargaining agreement?
What's the bargaining agreement?
So is the school through all this, are they excluded? I know they have their own set of rules and whatnot, but who's responsible for those negotiations?
The superintendent.
So not the town.
But we'll have to ask about that because it's done a little different. The school is, I think that's a great question. We'll ask about that because I don't know. I'm not going to say I know. But the school will be considered, will have its own section and what its duties and responsibilities are. So for most of these, we're going to be excluding the school.
Yeah.
They have very detailed requirements under state law, so they're a little bit different. They're even a little bit different than some of these other boards that.
The school, they are obligated to follow the towns on the health insurance stuff. The town sets up various health insurance choices, and I think the school is limited to those choices. The superintendent can't create a whole new health insurance thing just for the school employees, is my understanding.
There are some places where that's done, but I don't think it's done.
I think when we get to, I think we're going to have to talk about this. The schools are such a different animal. And I think we're going to have to talk about where we go with the schools when we
Maybe
talk about the
absent.
school section. You can't be absent in that meeting. I think, when the Collins Center set up, what we're going to talk about when the schools were its own chapter. And,
The schools are legislatively, they have a lot more requirements. And so, they're their own animal, but, to some extent, the town is still responsible for their actions. But when you're talking about HR matters, everyone has to follow the Family Leave Act. Everyone has to follow many of these federal and state laws. And, and it looks like now you have the HR department there that's handling that. I'm curious about whether they use the same policies.
yeah, I have no idea, but
Chair
we
policies
should,
and stuff. So
we
we'll
need to
talk
ask
a
that
bit
question.
more about that.
That would be a question I think that the town administrator would need to answer.
So
It's a great question. Thank you for asking.
yes, and that kind of rolls into your question about, what, when we're talking about administering personnel, who's, who's responsible for what, and who's following which one.
And I think there's other, I use personnel just because that's, personnel is 1940s. But whatever we're calling them today, I think IT is another one. Where there's got to be common practices, policies that transcends departments, security that transcends departments, and that sort of thing. So there are kind of different functions within the operational management of Burlington that go across all lines of business, if you will. Whether it be the library, the council on aging, the schools, or whatever, there's got to be some general things that will transcend all that. And that's the part that I don't quite get how we're going to pull that together.
And sometimes it's just a matter of people building relationships, but there's also can be some ways to work on the structure and language to make sure that's happening on a regular basis. So we will absolutely get into that, and I'm interested in all of your input as we go along.
Can I ask one question? If you look at our org chart and under the executive branch, and you look at the column, right, from Board of Assessors, Board of Health, Recreation, Constables, Housing Authority, and Shawshene Tech. And then you've got the school committee, town clerk, you've got all that whole column. Do all of those need to be in that column? I mean, is it required that they do that, or are there other towns where some of those functions fall in under the town administrator or town manager or select board or whatever? It just feels to me like we have a lot of independent operators kind of going off in their own directions, and it doesn't make sense to me that some of these groups are operating on their own. I feel like they should be in under a part of the structure.
When I asked this question, Tom's picking some brains here. We're like, what's the deal with that? My understanding, if I'm correct me if I'm wrong here, is a lot of these are elected positions. So it's almost like there's an authority above that, which is the voters. And the voters derive their authority to each of these little groups underneath. They get the select board, and then the select board gets their authority downward. So I don't know for sure, but library trustees, they're elected.
They are.
Then they are. So this is almost more representing authority as derived from the power of the people, not necessarily, certainly isn't reflecting policies or, like you're describing, sort of.
Okay, so this column really should be elected, is what you're saying to me. Those are like the elected.
I mean,
right?
Maybe everything across the top, including the legislative items in that top row, I think they all are things that are ultimately elected, but they're still split between executive and legislative. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, that whole column is elected. I think you're absolutely
I
right.
think you're absolutely right. But to answer your question, you can, first of all, you have a lot of elected bodies compared to some towns.
Mhm.
And that's not a good or a bad thing. I'm not saying, but because you have these elected bodies, not all of the elected bodies have to be the bodies that have to have all of the functions. Some of them can have, we'll talk about, as far as who they're hiring, who they're supervising, et cetera. Some of their functions and duties may fall more naturally under kind of the town administrator role to supervise some of these. And it's any one of these could result in a year-long study of how to have this, that, or the other thing.
Yeah.
So I think what we're going to have to do is focus on, is this working? Are there any that aren't working? Are there specific things that we want to fix?
Mhm.
Because I think every one of these boards could have like a year-long study on what their authorities are and how, you know, how, if you're interested in making changes, how we are. But we'll talk about these in general. A lot of boards like this have evolved more into advisory boards than into managerial boards. Not necessarily, pretty much planning, library trustees and school committee always seem to have kind of a special, unique, because they're legislated so heavy, there's a unique relationship. But other than those two, some of these others have evolved into more advisory bodies and
Advisory to whom?
advisory to the select board and town administrator. Rather than being the appointing authority for the director. And we will talk about that. And those are hard conversations to have. And ultimately, you're going to have to make some decisions about, are we going to keep this structure as is for our charter, just to create a charter? Are there areas where you want to make changes? This will all, you know, we'll talk about all.
You put a list together of the, did I ask you this about all the elected officers for the comparator towns? So if I have Winchester, for example, and they have select board, school committee, board of assessors, board of health, board of library trustees, moderator, planning board, and housing authority, and that's all. All the rest of them are not. So, you know, I think we're gonna, if we look at what other towns do, I think we'll find some interesting ideas for things to consider. And we said we're gonna use comparator towns, so that would be a good place to use them.
Some of those required by state housing authority.
Like, for example, recreation.
Planning board is, the state requires it to be a planning board, but it only requires they have subdivision control. We, through our bylaws, have given them special permit.
Right. So I think let's look at what other companies, you know, other towns do on that front, because I think that's clear. I think, you know, Jess mentioned recreation is one that pops out to me, that really easily, and given some of the feedback I have about some of the issues, in town with, you know, who's supposed to mow the lawn, and why is recreation mowing lawn and why isn't the DPW? And, you know, I mean, we have a lot of things that just don't make sense, but I think we get at it starting with the structure, and that would be one to me that I'd like to take a look at, but I also think we should be informed by what other towns do.
Yeah, and we already tried the town clerk thing, right?
Yeah, but I'm not willing to give up on that one yet. I just,
That's a different rec town clerk.
yeah, and we should look at, that's what I'm saying, if we look at all of the ones that we have now as elected, and look at what other towns are doing with look at what elected bodies other towns have on the comparators. Let's see what pops out of that. Something might be boldly obvious on that one. You know? So
Absolutely.
I think that would be good. And as soon as we get that, it'd be good to get out to us so we can all look at that and be prepared to have that discussion.
And I think that's in one of the prior presentations, but not necessarily in the form that would be digestible. So we do have a rubric that we go through if anyone's considering moving something from elected to appointed. We have a rubric of the kind of reasons why you would make a position for elected versus. You know, so we will go through that. It's also interesting because when we start talking about what should the town administrator's duties be, and this full spectrum of town administrator to town manager, a lot of it is going to have to do with these boards and committees, because we'll have to make some decisions with that to understand which of these roles should the town administrator take on, include into the role. So just to move on, talk about the budget for a second. The town administrator has two roles really with the budget. For the select board departments, they're preparing budget for those departments. For the town as a whole, the town administrator is charged with preparing the uniform budget document. So essentially they're taking the budget I know, from each of the boards and committees and putting it together in a document, not necessarily determining that. And one of the questions I have, and I'm wondering if this is the Ways and Committee job, who is making sure that when all these budgets get together, who is deciding how we're going to make this a balanced budget? If the town, is that something that the finance committee works on to make sure
I
that?
think we
the
should talk to
revenue-
John about that. I
There
think
was a finance committee, the
we
financial advisory group,
Mhm.
and.
I think we should talk to John.
So that's one thing that.
They had determined the form that each department has to use when filling the budget.
But your point about balance, what do you mean by that? What I fact that it makes sense financially across the.
Well, you've got a
town.
budget, and you've got,
You have-
everybody have their,
Yeah.
what they want, so you have to have somebody scrub all the stuff and go and deal with each department and then make sure it balances with you're proposing, what you want to spend is actually going to be what you're going to do and what the percent increase is. I think that's a discussion with John. I don't think we should get into that here.
They're given guidelines as to percentage. for their-
But they, and they do that based on their projections of what
Yeah.
things are going to cost. So
Right, so we'll
Again.
talk about that a little bit more when we.
I need to do a time check because we're now at 8:12. You've got what, 3 more slides?
Yeah.
Huh? Oh.
So, basically, I can get through this quickly so you can do your wrap up, but, the town administrator is, enforcing state law, bylaws, approving purchases for materials for the select board departments, negotiating contracts for the select board, subject to approval. They're all listed in your bylaw. But what's interesting, they're attending town meeting, answering questions, and any other duties required by law. So I wanted to bring up, these are your elected boards, which are also in there. We're going to be talking a little bit, and these elected boards have, some of them are appointing certain department heads. So we'll be talking a little bit more about this. So what the town administrator is doing for the select board departments, these boards are doing for their departments, in many cases. And as you said, there's some overlap, but it is a little blurry as far as what the overlap is. So we'll be diving these into these in more detail, and I'll be wanting to hear from you and have you bring any concerns.
So to be clear, let's say the Board of Health, they're presenting a budget to who?
Well, no,
No, Ways and Means.
I think they probably go to the town administrator
I
first.
hand them the budget, and then the town administrator puts together, here are all the budgets, and hand them.
Does the town administrator, we don't know the answer, but I guess that question of, there's an implied power, that is the power of finance, where if a board that is, let's say the Board of Health, it's one of these ones that's sort of on that top level, if the town administrator is effectively organizing that budget or collating it or making any decisions at all or doing anything, there's an implied, like, what is this chart organizing? Maybe not financials, but maybe just, I don't know what. So that makes more, that does make more sense.
Like the town administrator,
Time on Ways and Means, what happens is that the select board finance committee sets a budget. We're looking to keep our budget to no more than 4.5% increase. So Board of Health takes their last year's budget, looks at it, and makes whatever adjustments they can, trying to stay within the 4.5%. It then goes to a Ways and Means subcommittee, who then meets with the Board of Health people, and then it goes to a full finance committee, and then gets on the warrant.
Are they going through the town administrator?
that's the part we need to check. I think because the town administrator used to be the finance department, so I think there's, Eileen, you were involved in that. so-
Well, not specifically about that, but a slide back or two, Pat, before this one. Did it talk about purchasing? I know this is, it's on topic. Okay, so I don't, approved purchase materials or select board. Right, so that's bullet. So is that still the case? Sounds like, Jack, you're saying no. In other words, is the town taking care of the public, of the Board of Health stuff that they want, the COA stuff that they want? is someone here in this building buying all that stuff?
That's a good question. I think we should, I think we need to ask that
It's
question.
that silo thing, but I don't know if that's.
I know that's not the case for technology, so I think
Okay.
that, I think we need to ask that question.
Departments used to have their own deal with copy machines
Yeah.
and what have you, but it's all gone back in Bob Mercy's time, through separate supply.
I
It's all
don't,
gone through separate supply system for those type of routine supplies.
And if you say so, okay.
I think it's not working that way. So that's why.
Not last I knew.
This is just what it says on paper.
Yeah,
Doesn't mean it's still doing.
So can you make note that we need to kind of figure that one out?
Because it's informative by, they can't control spend.
Right. That's where I think we need to have a discussion with John and I think we should invite Patrick into that discussion, to participate in it, to kind of get a sense of what is actually happening. And that purchasing one's really, I think, is an important one.
I think, yeah, any contracts.
Yeah.
Right?
And,
Yeah.
Purchase games, we didn't. 30 years ago.
Okay.
So next time,
So we talked about elected boards. Next time, we're going to talk about, well, we may have the town administrator here, in Patrick, to ask them some questions about these things.
you tell me whether it makes sense. We have one meeting in December and then we jump to January. So what is the best thing for us to do to keep you on track? I mean,
Right. I'm wondering, I feel like you may need to hear from the town administrator before you make your decisions. An alternative way of doing it is deciding what you want to do and ask the town administrator what they think about it. But I think that it will inform your decision to have. So maybe it would be good to have John at the next meeting with a list of questions and my guess is that, I mean, he's not going to opine on some of these larger issues about, oh, should the select board and town administrator share authority with, but I think they'll be able to give you a lot of details about how do you do purchasing? How do you handle across all these boards? Is this a problem that you have to buy supplies for everybody? How does this work? Or
Can you
how do we
put
manage it?
Can you put the list of questions together for us to have him not how I expect it?
Yes, but I think we should work on that. We should meet and work on some of those. That's fine. But I think we'll try to give him some of the subjects in advance so that we're not blunt. So,
Okay, then to that end, could each one of you send me, open meeting rule, I need to be very conscious of it, send me one or as many questions as you have that you think we need to ask the town administrator. That way, I won't be just guessing what you're thinking. I actually will know. And then we can do it. And if you could get me that list, maybe Thanksgiving is obviously this week. So maybe by mid next week, by Wednesday, the 3rd. Is that right? Is that what Wednesday? Whatever that Wednesday is. That would be great.
Yes, Wednesday is okay.
Okay. Okay, great.
because then once you have some of your answers, we can start deliberating on some of these larger questions. And they're going to be, for example, let's talk about the select board town administrator shared authority with respect to appointments of staff reports.
Yeah.
Should the town administrator have a larger role? Should, working out it is as is. We want to talk about the select board and town administrator sharing of authority with other elected boards, including personnel, hiring, budgeting, purchasing, contracting. How is it working with all of these boards? Would it make sense to have some of this authority shared?
And just so those of you, and I think those of you who are doing interviews are probably hearing it, that is something we're hearing a lot about in our interviews with stakeholders, is about kind of the working of silos is what I hear a lot about. So and not working across purposes in many ways, and so the kind of the boards and the administration is not aligned. So this is something that we need to spend some time on.
So, how do we fix that? Do we fix it structurally? Do we fix it with some sort of difference in responsibilities for the town administrator? And the last one, the select board specifically charged us with talking about town administrator versus manager, the range of authority and responsibilities. Looking at your form of government, the town administrator has a fairly significant and strong range of authority within the departments that are the select boards. So, however, because you have a lot of elected boards that are operating independently, that range of authority isn't across all of the functions. So, it's a little different than in some circumstances where all of the boards would be under, the select board, and the town administrator would only have a little duty with that. The town administrator actually has very significant duties, but it's limited to the departments within the select board. So I want to talk about that. So I would, this is a really, after we talk to the town administrator, it's a really good time to hear what people's thoughts are.
It's really too bad that we don't have a second meeting in December, because I would love to, while it was hot in everybody's mind, but so be it.
But maybe we can start spending half of them, and I don't know how long.
So I wonder, yeah, maybe we all plan on a 2-hour meeting, I'm sure. Yeah, on that night. It might go a little bit longer. So if we could just plan, unless anybody's got a problem with staying longer, make that a later night, just because I think it'll be a really important to.
Just bring coffee so I don't fall asleep.
Sit next to you. I'll call lawyer jokes. I'll do something. Okay, thank you. You want to do a rundown of anything before we adjourn?
No, I mean, we really didn't make any decisions tonight,
Yeah.
so there's really no update for us to put on the
Okay.
website.
Maybe we just put something about we'll be inviting the town administrator into the next meeting or not.
I mean, they can find that on the agenda, can't they?
Depends on how proactive we want to be on the communication. I'm glad to you guys, you're the communication committee. Okay, is there anything else before we adjourn? If not, I'll take a motion. Motion to adjourn. Everybody opposed? No? Thanks, everybody.
Thanksgiving.
And have a happy Thanksgiving.
Monday or Tuesday.
I do.
I didn't have to tell me now. I just thought.
Oh, no.
I just.